Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm genuinely glad you found it. I've been building this cozy corner of YouTube for people who enjoy calming, fantasy-infused historical stories to fall asleep to. Every episode is designed to blend mystery, folklore, and a touch of magic, followed by soft background ambience to help you drift off. Tonight's story is one of my favorites so far. Eerie, emotional, and just grounded enough to feel like it might have really happened. But before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Do you prefer one longer story per video, or a mix of two shorter ones? Let me know in the comments, and feel free to pitch your own dream historical fantasy pairings. I read every single one, and I've already built future episodes based on your ideas. Tonight's story: the secret zombie uprising during the Black Death. Set in plague-stricken Prague in 1348, it follows an ambitious physician whose experiments with the infected spark something far more terrifying than disease. This is a slower burning horror, filled with torchlit alleys, whispered rumors, ethical dilemmas, and a final act that still gives me chills. Let's begin. They say the Black Death killed nearly half of Europe. But in the quiet streets of Prague, tucked among candlelit alleyways and ivy-choked courtyards, there was something else killing the living. Something even darker than plague. For centuries, it was hidden from history, buried beneath layers of soot, superstition, and silence. But some journals survived, torn, burnt, written in code. From these, a darker truth emerges, one that begins in the stone cellar of a physician who sought to outwit death. Dr. Karol Sveda was not mad, at least not yet. He was known in Prague as brilliant, young, and obsessively curious. While others fled the plague or prayed for mercy, Sveda took notes. He chronicled the progression of buboes, tracked mortality rates by neighborhood, and dissected cadavers when he could bribe the church grave watchers. But beneath his methodical calm was a gnawing, furious need to understand why death chose some and spared others. And so, when a young stable boy died in his arms after showing uncharacteristically slow symptom onset, Sveda saw an opportunity. He stitched the body shut and preserved it in snow, grinding herbs he'd read about in Byzantine manuscripts: wolfsbane, dried nightshade, and a viscous resin used in ancient embalming. He injected the mixture into the boy's neck, then waited. The heart stirred, only slightly, but enough to jolt the doctor into stumbling backward. The boy's lips parted. His eyes did not blink, but they moved, dull, milk white, and then, very slowly, the corpse sat up. Sveda's hands trembled. He didn't record this in his official journal, only in a hidden one, wrapped in waxcloth and buried under floorboards. For days, he fed it broth and kept it chained to the stone wall. It didn't speak. It didn't sleep, but it learned, watched. And on the fourth night, when the doctor fell asleep near the fire, the creature chewed through the leather strap and crept toward him. It didn't bite. Not then. Instead, it touched his throat with cold fingers, then tilted its head like a mocking mirror. He screamed. The creature was eventually contained. He reinforced the cellar door and added iron shackles. But it wasn't enough, because one morning, a knock came at the back door. A delivery girl named Lenka, bringing sheep's milk and salted bread. The door had been left ajar. The creature was loose. By the time Sveda reached her, it was too late. Lenka staggered into the alleys, clutching her shoulder. She collapsed in a courtyard between two inns. A thief named Tomas found her body and tried to cut the purse from her belt. That's when she sat up slack-jawed and bit deep into his collarbone. He screamed so loud, the nearby tavern emptied. By dusk, the city watch reported 2 other attacks. One near the midwife's house, Marta, a local healer who had tried to tend to Thomas. Another in the brewery. Sveda, eyes bloodshot from reading his hidden texts, knew it was already too late to hide. But still, he refused to reveal the truth. Instead, he began experimenting again. He brought salt into the cellar. His book suggested the unholy could not cross consecrated salt lines. It worked. Barely. He tuned bronze bells to a specific frequency and hung them from the rafters. The creature shrieked, recoiling like a scorched dog. But while he was discovering defenses, the infection spread. The undead didn't multiply quickly. They were slow to change. Sometimes hours passed before the fever turned to madness. That made them even harder to track. Friends harbored infected loved ones, not knowing what they would become. Rumors spread that the plague was no longer natural, that it was a punishment for sorcery, or perhaps Jewish magic. The Jewish quarter faced attacks, and Rabbi Meir ben Ezra, once Sveda's friend and fellow scholar, was nearly executed by a mob. Sveda found him just in time, dragging him into a wine cellar under a collapsed house. "You did this, didn't you?" Meir whispered, clutching a cracked rib. "You played with death and lost." "I can end it," Sveda hissed, "but I need your help." Meir stared at him in silence, then slowly nodded. He had once read forbidden writings from Andalusia, accounts of unquiet flesh and spirits that could reanimate bone. Together, they compared notes. They discovered that sacred salt worked best when laid in symbols. Bells worked, but only certain tones. Fire always worked, but was dangerous. Too dangerous for a city already on edge. Meanwhile, the infection moved. A cathedral scribe was bitten during a sacrament run. A blacksmith's apprentice hid his fever until he collapsed at the forge. Even Lady Aliska, a noblewoman, was seen whispering to herself at a balcony, her eyes clouding like milk. That night, the panic broke into open chaos. Torches burned. Mobs formed. Anyone coughing too hard was accused of witchcraft. 3 women were drowned in the river. A priest tried to perform mass exorcisms in the square, only to be torn apart by someone he had tried to save. And through it all, Sveda watched and scribbled, desperate, haunted, unraveling. Then came the final cruelty. His sister Dita, a novice in the church, was infected. She had come to bring him food and warn him about the raids, and was bitten by an infected monk hiding in the chapel. She hid her wound from him, smiling through pale lips. When he finally saw the fever rising in her eyes, he fell to his knees. "Let me fix this," he begged. "There's nothing to fix," she whispered, "only to end." He cradled her through the night, recording every change, every shift in her breathing. When she rose, fangs half-formed, he kissed her forehead and led her, quietly, into the fire pit he dug beneath the cellar floor. He did not cry. He simply wrote, "I am now certain this will never leave Prague, but neither will I." In the bitter days that followed, Dr. Karol Sveda no longer left his home, not because of fear, but because the truth had become unbearable. He had mapped every location of an attack with black ink, forming a lattice of infection. From the outer streets toward the center, the spread was spiraling. Not wildfire, something more calculating. The creatures were beginning to move together, as if guided by memory or scent, as if some instinct had returned. He kept Dita's shore. It hung by the fire, never washed. Some nights he thought he could still smell her warmth. Other nights, he burned pages of his original notes, fearing someone would find them and try again. But the city would not wait. Councilmen met in secret chambers to debate lockdowns, curfews, purges. Rumors of a plague of teeth filled the taverns. Everyone had a cousin or friend of a friend who had seen one. The cries of the sick blended with the howling wind, and people no longer opened their doors after dark. It was Mir who proposed the trap. "They are drawn to memory," he said, one hand resting on a crumbling Hebrew text. "To familiarity. Perhaps we build a sanctuary of scent." Sveda leaned in. "You mean bait?" "Yes," Mir said. "A replica of something familiar. Warmth, incense, wood smoke, holy oils. Let them come. And then what? Then we burn it to the ground." They chose the abandoned grain hall near the river. It had high windows, old stone floors, and enough space to house nearly 24 of the infected, if they could lure them. Sveda and Meir worked in secret with a small group of trusted helpers. A laundress who'd lost her husband, a former soldier with only one arm, and a gravedigger named Andrzej, who had seen too much to ever sleep soundly again. They lined the hall with salt, set bells in the rafters, painted ancient runes taken from texts older than Prague itself. Meir even mixed ash from the golem legend into the plaster, a prayer for protection, long forgotten. Then came the hard part. They had to invite the infected in. The first night, they lit the incense and waited. Nothing. The second night, one came. A boy, maybe 12, eyes white and ribs showing through a tattered smock. He stood at the door, sniffed the air, and entered without fear. Sveda's heart broke. The boy looks like a student he once taught about the 4 humors. By the 4th night, there were 9. Meir insisted they not act until at least 15 had gathered. "They're stronger in groups," he said. "1 or 2 can be handled, but more than that, it becomes a cleansing." On the 6th night, the city was silent. Not the fearful hush of before. Too silent. Not a cough. Not a bell. Sveda looked out from the balcony of his flat and saw a flicker of movement. Then another. From alleyways. From rooftops. The infected were converging. That night, 23 entered the grain hall. Some limped. Others crawled. One dragged a rosary behind her, eyes vacant but murmuring old Latin hymns. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like memories. Broken and bent, but still wearing the faces of mothers, lovers, siblings. Sveda watched from a narrow window across the square, jaw clenched. Meir gave the nod. Andrzej lit the fuse. It wasn't firewood they'd stacked around the building. It was pitch-soaked pine, tar barrels, and powdered quicklime. When the fire took, it screamed like a storm. The bell tones inside were warped by the heat, creating an eerie, almost singing sound. Sveda didn't look away as the roof collapsed, not even when one of the infected, face charred beyond recognition, turned toward the window and seemed to reach out with one last shriek. The fires burned for hours. Dawn rose on a city changed. No new attacks were reported. The panic eased, but whispers remained. The council offered no explanation. The church declared it a miracle. Sveda was thanked by no one. He didn't want thanks. He wanted silence. In the weeks that followed, he buried his journals. He wrote new ones that blamed the plague, the weather, and bad humors. The truth would not be passed on, not unless someone needed it. But the cost haunted him, Dieter's voice in dreams. The boy in the smock, Mia's eyes, hollowed from all he'd seen. One night, months later, he stood at the edge of the Vltava river, watching the last of winter's ice float downstream. A man joined him, hooded, quiet. "You burned them all?" the man asked. Sveda nodded. "Then why?" the man said. Did my son wake up last night?" The doctor said nothing. The wind shifted, and somewhere, far off, a bell rang. Spring returned to Prague slowly. After the fire in the grain hall, the city seemed to exhale. Merchants reopened their stores. Children played in the streets again, though never after sunset. The plague had not ended, but the worst of the nightmare had seemingly passed. Dr. Karol Sveda resumed his public duties with cautious quiet. He visited homes with trembling hands, no longer offering certainty, only compassion. The disease still took lives, but no longer bit them from the inside out. Still, he slept little. In private, he reread his own notes with increasing detachment. He no longer recognized the man who had once scribbled with such ambition. So much of his original theory about reanimating immune response, about biological catalysts extracted from rat-borne pustules, had been warped by desperation. What had started as science had become something older, something closer to alchemy or necromancy. He burned those notes too, but something remained. The man from the river, whose son had woken up, haunted his thoughts. Sveda had searched every morgue. No report of a child's resurrection. No sightings. It could have been a grieving man's madness. But grief and madness, Sveda knew, often walked hand in hand with truth. Weeks passed. A traveling monk arrived from the Bavarian hills, bearing tales of a small village that had vanished overnight. Livestock untouched. No signs of a raid. Just gone. He spoke of red handprints on stone walls and iron gates torn from their hinges. Sveda asked him to describe the smell. The monk's face blanched. "Like ash and rot," he whispered, "but colder than death." By summer, rumors of sickness in nearby towns began to resurface. Different from the plague, faster, more violent. Sveda, older now and forever altered, wrote one final entry in a new journal, this time encoded. If the ash did not consume them, then perhaps something deeper rooted remains. A hunger, now slumbering. But hunger always wakes. This was not the end. It was a trial run, a whisper. The next time, it will not be 23. It will be 20,000. And fire will not be enough. He placed the book inside a sealed cask, wrapped in lead, and buried it beneath the foundations of the Charles Bridge, beneath stones laid before he was born. No one saw him do it. But years later, during renovations, a child would find a bone needle carved with strange script. And that night, a dog would go missing. The whispers never left Prague. Some claimed the infection was a punishment. Others said it was a test. But all agreed on one thing. The dead had walked. And one day, they might again.